But as this story evolves in this way, and ahead of tomorrow's second impeachment hearing, I think it's also just worth articulating the existence of the elephant in the room here, right? Because I know this is basic and I know you know it, but I feel like it's easy to lose sight of as we head into the second public impeachment hearing here. I mean, there's a reason that when the whistleblower complaint was first filed, that bit about holding up the military aid to Ukraine, that was filed separately in a classified appendix. I mean, the whistleblower knew that even if that complaint was getting delivered to Congress, which is what he or she wanted, still, this bit about the military aid to Ukraine being held up, the whistleblower took steps to try to make sure that that was treated with special care, that the president's order to hold up military aid to Ukraine would be handled as sensitive, classified information, that would be held tighter, it would be restricted more, that fewer people would see that. Right? Why would the whistleblower want to make sure that that part of what the whistleblower was alleging, this incredibly inflammatory allegation that the whistleblower is making about the president of the United States committing clearly impeachable and illegal acts in office to benefit himself politically at the expense of U.S. national security and our allies? I mean, the whistleblower is willing to say a lot on page 1 of that complaint, but that bit about the president holding up military aid to Ukraine, keep that classified. Why should that be kept more quiet? Well, we have since learned in this education we've all had as civilians watching these impeachment proceedings roll out, as we've learned from these witnesses who are experts in this field, we have since learned from them that the reason you'd want to keep something like that as quiet as possible is because, among other things, that becoming public knowledge, it becoming known around the world that U.S. military aid to Ukraine was being held up, that itself is a damaging thing to Ukraine. Not just them losing the aid, which hurts them materially, but everybody knowing that their aid was in jeopardy, that it was being held up by the American president, that itself incurs damage.
Ukrainians would like to be able to negotiate from a position of strength, or at least more strength than they now have. Part of that strength, part of the ability of the Ukrainians to negotiate against the Russians, with the Russians for an end to the war in Donbass, depends on the United States and other international support. If we withdraw or suspend or threaten to withdraw our security assistance, that's a message to the Ukrainians, but it's at least as important, as your question indicates, Mr. Chairman, to the Russians, who are looking for any sign of weakness or any sign that we are withdrawing our support for Ukraine.
The Russians are looking for any sign of weakness, any sign that we are withdrawing our support for Ukraine. So if it becomes known that that support is threatened, that itself hurts Ukraine. That benefits Russia, right? The president was holding up aid to Ukraine to try to pressure them to cook up these investigations to help him against the Democrats in 2020. But in using Ukraine that way, and in putting on ice hundreds of millions of dollars of U.S. aid to them, he hurt them. He hurt their national security. He specifically, as Bill Taylor just explained there yesterday, he hurt their negotiating position vis-a-vis Russia, with whom they are in a war right now. Which means Russia benefits from Trump doing that. From Trump withholding that military aid, Russia benefits from that because it shows that Ukraine doesn't have the kind of American and international support that Ukraine might have thought they had. And so they're weaker than everybody thought they were. They're more at Russia's mercy. Right? Even with the military aid now being forced to be released because of this scandal, that's how this thing is shaking out now in terms of who benefits. Quote, in the past, American diplomats worked closely with Kiev in any talks with Moscow. They presented a united front to the Kremlin. They cajoled the European Union to maintain sanctions. They tried to reassure a nervous Ukrainian public. But now, the United States is largely absent from the political and diplomatic process over resolving the war in the East. The leader of one pro-U.S. political party in Ukraine telling the Washington Post today, quote, Ukraine is now kind of naked. We are alone confronting Russia. David Ignatius that was in the New York Times, not the Washington Post. David Ignatius in the Washington Post raising much the same alarm today. Trump's Ukraine machinations have yielded the diminution of U.S. power and a corresponding increase in Russia's military and diplomatic leverage. The United States was an important backup for Ukraine. Losing that support puts Kiev in a weaker bargaining position vis-a-vis Russia. How is the United States shaping events as Ukraine is rebalanced now? America isn't really a player. Trump said in September while meeting Zelensky in New York, quote, "I really hope that you and President Putin can get together and solve your problem." Yeah, we know we used to be your ally, your most important ally. We know we used to stand shoulder to shoulder with you, so you never felt like you had to face Russia alone. But now you're alone. Good luck against Putin now. See what you can work out with him, then get back to me. If it works out, maybe you'll get a White House visit. Otherwise, maybe not. I mean, we are in the middle of this impeachment now, and it is still unfolding, and there is still more to learn, and tomorrow should be a big deal. Even just the news tonight is a big deal. But even after only one day of public hearings so far, I mean, the elephant in the room here feels like it's rearing up and stomping its feet. Because who benefits with all of these things that Trump has done? With all of them. With all the stuff in the middle of the impeachment, but all the other stuff he's doing simultaneously. I mean, it wasn't just pressure on Ukraine to cough up investigations against Joe Biden, right? It was withholding military aid. Withholding the military aid, letting it be known that their military aid was in question. That alone disadvantages Ukraine in their hot war fight against Russia. Benefit to Russia. The U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine, who is specifically tasked to help Ukraine in its war and its negotiations against Russia, that was this guy, Kurt Volker, who resigned when he was called in to testify in the impeachment proceedings. We've just learned that the Trump administration just isn't going to fill that job now that Volker resigned from it. They're getting rid of that job now. No more dedicated U.S. envoy for helping Ukraine in their war with Russia. I'm sure Russia is delighted by that, too. We learned from the testimony of Foreign Service Officer Christopher Anderson, whose testimony has been released in transcript form. We learned from him that when Russia attacked Ukrainian ships and took a whole bunch of Ukrainian sailors prisoner this time last year, the Trump White House blocked a statement of condemnation from being issued against Russia for having done that. Why did the Trump White House block a statement condemning Russia seizing Ukrainian ships and stealing Ukrainian sailors? Trump White House blocked that. Benefit to Russia. We learned from Anderson as well that when a CNN story ran last year about the U.S. Navy doing an exercise in the Black Sea that was portrayed as the U.S. military standing up to Russia in the Black Sea, President Trump saw that report and called National Security Advisor John Bolton at home to tell Bolton how upset he was by that report. And in response, the White House ordered the Navy to not do that exercise in the Black Sea. Wouldn't want to upset Russia. We learned from National Security Council staffer Catherine Croft, whose testimony has also been released in transcript form, that even after the Trump administration set a new policy that Ukraine would get Javelin missiles from the U.S., and everybody in the administration signed off on that policy, in the State Department, in the Defense Department, and everybody else, National Security Council, everybody's on board. The White House specifically intervened with a late hold on those missiles. Why? What was the White House concerned about? According to Catherine Croft, quote, that Russia would react negatively to the provision of javelins to Ukraine. Yes, we can't have that. I mean, on the day that President Trump was promising that he definitely wasn't watching his first impeachment hearing, that day, President Erdogan of Turkey is at the White House yesterday. And that relationship is weird and inexplicable enough. But when Trump does Erdogan this favor, right, and precipitously pulls U.S. troops out of northeastern Syria, in a phone call with Erdogan, he decides he's going to do that, and he does it. The immediate result is that Turkey and Russia come in to take over that land that our allies and U.S. Special Forces had been holding in northeastern Syria. The U.S. base there literally now has, the American base there now has a Russian flag flying over it. And Russian soldiers are now using that base, and Russian soldiers are now patrolling that part of the country where U.S. troops and U.S. allies were removed by President Trump's actions. We're out. Here, Putin, you can have it. Turkey has also just bought Russian anti-aircraft weapons. Turkey is a member of NATO. Having a NATO member buy advanced Russian weapons systems is a huge military coup for Russia, and it is a crisis for NATO. I mean, not to get into the technicalities of it, but having a NATO member operating a sophisticated Russian anti-aircraft missile system like this potentially exposes the most secret U.S. fighter jet technology to the Russians. Thanks, Turkey. Thanks for doing that. Republican senators who were upset by that and who are upset by the Turkish military attacking our allies in Syria. President Trump waded in during this White House visit to try to smooth that all over. to try to calm down Republican senators about that, to try to make it okay for Turkey. So it's okay that they attacked our allies, and it's okay that they've got to keep those sophisticated Russian weapons. Trump wants Turkey to keep those sophisticated Russian weapons, regardless of what that means for U.S. military superiority and for NATO. Advantage Russia. I mean, even the core weirdness at the heart of the impeachment. Trump didn't just ask Ukraine to announce bogus investigations into Joe Biden, right? Remember what else he asked Ukraine to investigate? He asked them to investigate 2016, specifically this weird conspiracy theory that it wasn't Russia that messed with our elections in 2016, it was Ukraine messing with our elections. It's what David Sanger in the New York Times tonight calls one of the many odd twists in the partisan noise around the impeachment. President Trump's effort to divert attention from suspicions about the 2016 hack away from Russia. He calls it a completely discredited theory that Ukrainian hackers, not Russia's military intelligence, were responsible for the hack. Well, where did this completely discredited theory come from? That it was Ukraine that meddled in the 2016 election and not Russia? I mean, all of U.S. intelligence and the bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee concludes without any equivocation it was Russia who messed with us. The president is advancing this theory that instead it wasn't Russia, it was Ukraine. Ukraine did it. Where does that come from? We actually now have an origin story for where that came from. The recently released, this was just recently released by a court order, recently released FBI interview notes with Trump's deputy campaign chair, Rick Gates, gives us our earliest known appearance of that weird conspiracy theory in the wild. From the FBI interview notes with Rick Gates, quote, Gates recalled Paul Manafort saying the hack was likely carried out by the Ukrainians, not the Russians. Why did Manafort say that? That, quote, parroted a narrative that Kilimnik often supported. Kilimnik, Konstantin Kilimnik, that's the person who was saying that it was Ukraine, not Russia. That's where Paul Manafort got it from. Who's Konstantin Kilimnik? Konstantin Kilimnik is the guy who Manafort worked with for years in Ukraine. Konstantin Kilimnik, who came out of Russian military intelligence, who the FBI assesses is still linked to Russian military intelligence. So this whole thing that the president and the White House and Republicans in Congress now are actively promoting, this conspiracy theory that Russia didn't intervene in the 2016 election, it was Ukraine who did that, that theory appears to have originated with the GRU, with Russian military intelligence, with a Russian military intelligence guy who delivered it to the president's campaign chair, who is in prison for laundering and not paying taxes on the millions of dollars he took from pro-Kremlin political allies and political parties in Ukraine. I mean, the president is now promoting the conspiracy theory that Russia didn't intervene in the election at all, it was Ukraine. That theory is from Russian military intelligence. I mean, I know this impeachment inquiry is about one specific thing that the president did about Ukraine. And it is about that for a reason. I mean, it's proven that he did it. He's admitted that he's done it. It's illegal and impeachable, and he's going to get impeached for it. I get it. But literally everything he is doing here, including the core allegations at the heart of the impeachment, all just happen to benefit Russia. All just happen to redound to the benefit of Russia. All of them. And maybe that is a huge coincidence, but, I mean, what do we do with that? We'll get some help with that next.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.